I can still be followed in the grocery store, or the CVS, or you can sense something when someone's looking at you a particular way. And my approach to all that is, you know what? If I'm in a negotiation with you, the color that matters is green. So I was raised not to spend my time on a journey worrying and guessing what someone is thinking about me. And there's a lot of that that goes on, and I think it's anxiety producing. Your sense of self worth comes from your inside because I have no control over what is happening external. The only things I get to control are driving outcomes for the foundation, and then I'm legally and happily required to make sure that our environment meets the tenets of the law, civil rights, people's identities. Different things are nurtured, and we have well more than a sufficient environment to make it a conducive environment. But the third leg, which is the inner journey of another person and how they're processing me and looking at my blackness, I don't get to control that. I get to control me, and I get a say in how the assets go. And that's where I put my focus. But it's not, again, the false choice that, oh, I'm pretending that those things aren't happening, because sometimes people say, oh, you're not paying attention. Of course I'm paying attention to it. I'm a sentient being. I know what's going on around me, but it's a question of, does it control me, or am I going to be in control? I would rather be in control.
Welcome to Black Philanthropy, Our Stories, where each episode spotlights awesome Black and African American leaders committed to transforming lives and communities through philanthropy. These authentic conversations will inspire, challenge, and remind you you are not alone. Here's your host, award-winning writer, director, and founder of Simuel and Murray, Michelle Renee Jackson.
I am so grateful to have Rey Ramsey today, who is the ultimate leader for the Nathan Cummings Foundation. Rey, we are so pleased to have you with us today. I know, of course, we all know that you have a huge following and are well known around the country. And I would imagine also the world, of course. But for those of our guests who are not familiar with you and some of your work, I just wanted to ask first if you could just introduce yourself. What's your name? Well, we already know your name, Rey Ramsey. And sort of what is a great way to first get to know you about the kind of work that you do in this space.
Well, again, my name is Rey Ramsey. And, Michelle, I always describe myself as the obvious product of my parents, and a welder and a nurse. And I often say I'm a Philly kid. So I was born right outside of Philadelphia, and that's where I got started in life. And Philly will always be a part of me, Philly and South Jersey, and it infuses in everything I do and how I operate. And I made a promise years and years ago to a woman who changed my life, my sixth grade teacher, and she saved me. And we can talk more about that. But Mrs. Pfeiffer saved my life. And what was important about it at the end in eighth grade at graduation, she said, "I think you're going to go on and do really well, but I have one request." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Promise me you'll never crush the human spirit." And to honor her, I said, well, I'm going to put a little twist on it. And I said, I'm going to dedicate myself to lifting the human spirit. I don't know what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an eighth grader.
Mm-hmm.
I still wanted to be a hockey player at that time. So I had no idea, where it would go. But it's always been a through line for me. And so I guess that's the best way to get to know me right out of the gate.
For some of our listeners who are listening for the first time, I am a filmmaker, I'm a writer, I'm a director, I'm a photographer. I run our company, Simuel and Murray, which produces this podcast. I'm the founder and principal artist of it. Our name is Simuel and Murray because I wanted to honor our grandmother's maiden names. So we come from the Simuels and the Murrays. Ultimately, the value system for me, but also the value system for us as a production company, is to honor our ancestors. We descend from enslaved people. We're very proud to descend from enslaved people. One of the the reasons why I love doing this podcast is because I think about, let's say, the 388,000 people who were shipped from Africa to the North America, those 2,000 boats that kept those people. Most of us who descend from enslaved people in this country are from those 2,000 boats. And so I can't speak for you. We'd love to know more about your own history here in this country. But for so many descendants of enslaved people, African Americans in this country, who came via the bottom of a boat, who are now like you, running foundations, like Darren Goss running foundations, like Stephen Wallace, someone who's a master fundraiser. The fact that we can come through slavery and now be in leadership positions within a sector that is so powerful, to me, is just worthy of honor, celebration, pride. It says a lot about who we are as a people, but also who we are as a country. So let's talk about Black philanthropy for a moment. Can you, because you've been in the game for a bit of time, can you tell us what your definition of Black philanthropy is today, Ray?
Yeah, look, I look at philanthropy as, at the end of the day, it's service, and it's combining that with purpose, and then it's combining that with assets. And so what you're trying
Mm-hmm.
to do is you're bringing them all together. And you have to have a service orientation. And that is directly opposite of arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Purpose, you need to know what you're trying to do. And when you have assets, you have to have two things in mind. What is your intent, and what are your expectations?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I view it. And you need a clear mind. And a lot of times the mind gets clouded with different things that will drive what you're investing in. And I look at philanthropy as an investment. And it's just a different kind of financial investment because it's not just money. And so if you invest money and you invest your retirement, you have an expectation that you're going to get a return. Uh, when you invest money in philanthropy, you ought to have an expectation of a social return,
Mm-hmm.
and you ought to be able to articulate what that is. But what you'll find very often is the inability to articulate that. And I often say to people, anyone can spend, but fewer people know how to invest.
Mm-hmm.
And this is about investing, not just spending.
Can you walk us through your journey into philanthropy?
Well, I have an indirect journey into philanthropy. I often call myself the accidental CEO. First of all, in terms of philanthropy, I raised money like you are talking about. And for most of my career, I've been on what I call the asset seeker, chasing the money in many different roles that I've played in my life on behalf of different nonprofits. So I became keenly aware of how the system operated. Then I was asked and recruited by a search firm to join the board of the Nathan Cummings Foundation. And lo and behold, at some point, as a board member, the board asked me to step in as interim CEO and then ultimately as the CEO. Although people would use the term, "Oh, are you now the permanent CEO?" And I'm like, there's no such thing as permanent. I'm the CEO. I don't know whether you call it permanent or interim, it doesn't matter because you're not here forever. And that notion that you're not here forever and you shouldn't be thinking of yourself being there forever gives you that sense of urgency. So that's how I arrived at it. I did not pursue running a foundation or even working for a foundation. I went straight from being a board member who was on our investment committee to suddenly in the CEO spot. But what I carried with me was a memory of all of the collage of experiences for what it was like to raise money. And that has infused our work. People always looked at me and said I was good at selling, and I think selling is about passion, right? It's about passion combined with logic, and I was always able to bring those two parts together. And you have to tell a story. And the mistake that people make in fundraising is they will often walk in and tell you what they want to do, and that's important. But what you have to do is the other part of it, which is the homework. What does the funder care about? And if you can tell your story through the lens of the eye of the funder, you've got an awfully good chance to be able to get resources out of that. And I was always told I was good at it. I don't know. It's an art. It's not a science. It's an art. And I try to bring that passion. I used to have people saying, "You're just hard to say no to,"
You are hard to say no
because
to.
I would just try to overwhelm them with the passion of what I cared about, and then try to find a way to get it done. So I always had joy in doing it, and you have to have joy. Fundraising is not easy, but if you don't bring joy, who wants to give you money?
Hmm.
If you also don't make it a likable experience for the person with money, they're going to have to talk to you again. So if you make yourself unlikable, what makes you think on a human level they want to sit with you again and hear your story? So
Hmm.
you've got to bring all that together because it's just another person across from you. It's not a vague concept, it's a person.
It's fascinating, Ray, because I think there is this interesting divide. I'm sure that you're aware. Well, I would like to know your opinion about this divide of the funder and the fundraiser, the giver and
Hmm.
the beggar, right? Depending on how
Hmm.
one looks at it. And you and I both know fundraising is not about begging; it's about inviting into relationship,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Hmm.
but anyway, people sometimes feel like, well, it's also the funder who has all the money, and then the fundraiser who's got to figure out all the things that you just said. Can you talk a little bit about the transition from going from fundraiser that no one can say no to, who is now on the fundraising, or pardon me, on the funding side, who's actually now you actually have to say no? How interesting. Before you had to convince people or engage them in saying yes, and now you're in a position to say, actually, no, this is not going to work out for you.
Well, there are a couple of through lines, Michelle. One is the recognition that you're interdependent. And
Hmm.
so what I often say to people is having the money means nothing unless I can find good partners.
That's right. That's
Okay,
right.
so I actually need you. And that's what we try to function like. We need each other. And I'm not into banning words, and we know some people are all about banning words, but the term that we banned, and I specifically said I want to ban the term, which I did not like the word grantee.
Hmm.
And so at Nathan Cummings Foundation, we don't use that term. And I stood up in front of the staff at one of our town halls, because I do a town hall every month. And my exact words were, nobody is your damn grantee. They are your partner.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so if you use the word partner, it settles your mind. You understand that there's a mutuality to be exchanged here. And so that's our philosophy about doing that. And in terms of saying no, well, everybody gets a no. The question is, when you are the person who has to say no, how do you do it? And are you available to give feedback and talk to them? It's a journey, and a lot of organizations are on journeys. I spend time talking to people all the time, even as the CEO, and sometimes I'll just give them a half hour of time, and then they'll say, can I share my business plan with you? And I too often say yes to that, and then I say, but can you take it? Because I'm going to give you actual feedback, and it's not always going to be pretty. So
Hmm.
again, the mutuality. I'm not here to just make it all nicey nice. I want to help you get better at your craft. And then maybe it's not time right now, but maybe later you'll come back and you can get the yes that you seek. Or maybe it's not our money at this moment, but maybe I know someone else, and maybe you fit better with their priorities than with our priorities.
Hmm. Um, Ray, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, again, you and how you enter into this space. And so you talked about an educator in your life who helped save your life and helped you think through how you wanted to be in the world, not someone who crushes people's spirit, but someone who lifts people's spirits up. I wanted to also ask you, as it relates to your work coming into the space of philanthropy through fundraising, and now as a funder as well, if there's anyone or any community of people that you seek to honor or to be mindful of. And typically for me, I'll always come back to enslaved people. I just want to honor them. I want to make sure that they're proud of me when we get to meet one day.
There are many parts to that. One is you carry with you who you are, like you were saying, ancestries, parents. We need to honor them in how we go about our craft and how we go about our work. But I've been struck over the years, just given my career, I have gotten to work with so many amazing women
Hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
single moms in
Mm-hmm.
particular. So much so that a number of years ago, when I was running an organization called One Economy Corporation, which was all about bringing broadband into the lives of low income people, one of the things that was holding people back at that time, and this was in the early 2000s, where people said, well, there's not enough content which is relevant, which speaks to particularly people of color, women of color. So I had this dream that eventually became a yes, and
Mm-hmm.
it was to create online content. And I created a web series that was called Diary of a Single Mom.
Hmm.
And I knew I couldn't produce it myself. So I sought out people who know how to produce content. That's Hollywood. And I got introduced to Robert Townsend, the actor, director, producer, and got him to say yes to me. Tracked that brother down, chased him on one of his sets that he was doing in Canada, and he finally said yes, that he would produce the series. And it's an amazing series. People can still find it, I think, online. It's called Diary of a Single Mom, but it had Diane Carroll, Billy D. Williams,
Hmm.
some amazing people. But the whole thing was to honor these single moms but show the arc of their lives
Mm-hmm.
and how they try to cope. But then, alongside the storyline, my real intent, which is what I call public purpose media, again, the word purpose, have media with a purpose. And so it was intended to inform, to inspire, and to facilitate how you could take action. So you could find on the screen the local resources if we were dealing with diabetes, dealing with mental health, dealing with domestic violence. All of that was embedded in the story, which was intended to give you information and to inspire you. And I turned to Hollywood. So it was an example of someone like Robert saying yes. And so what you often are trying to do is what I call stitch together the yeses,
Hmm.
right? We are not in this world. We have two false premises. One is that the Horatio Alger story, that somehow you bootstrap it without anybody else. It's nonsense, because people who just believe in that are delusional, or they're lying, because there's no such thing as a self-made person. We
Mm-hmm.
all have people who say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or on the other end, we make the mistake when there are systems that are broken, and there are, we over index for that, and we say, oh, it's a broken system, to the extent that the individual's agency is taken away from them, that their actions don't matter. So why bother? And so a lot of young people are dealing with that, and they're almost given permission to, like, blame the system. There's nothing on you, when
Mm-hmm.
we know that their resiliency, just like our ancestors, like you were describing on boats, it was their resiliency that made a difference. But they could have succumbed, because anybody could have said, it's too hard, I'm on the boat, I'm going to jump off, I
Mm-hmm.
want to I want to get out of there. So the truth is elements of both. And we miss that, but it is a yearning for a yes. And all of our lives, all of us, are constantly looking for the yes. So the final point to answer your question is, I try to honor people on the back end who live a life that is filled with the word no.
Hmm.
And very often people get a no by the glances that other people give, by the look away that people give if they see a poor person. Remember that you affect people in how you interact, how you look at them, how you look away, how we dehumanize, and we make certain people invisible. That's who we have to keep in mind, because that's ultimately the purpose for which we're doing our work. And if you're not careful, it becomes the arrogant journey. And then it becomes the me, the my, the I. And it's always should stay focused on what is the purpose and who are we actually fighting for.
Why single mothers?
I did a lot of work in my career in affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of those households were made up of those women, strong women. And I was always in awe, because I said, somehow with this tiny income, she manages to get coats on the kids,
Mm-hmm.
and she manages to feed them. And I think from a budgeting standpoint, I always say, how do you do that? How
Mm-hmm.
do you make it work? And we have too many programs that treats people like they are passive recipients without any common sense. And I would always say, I'll bet on her.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give her the money because she'll make the right decisions. But we get overly prescriptive. And one of the things I say to people in philanthropy is, no one is interested in another person permanently curating their life. And so this is where, again, we have to be careful, because we start trying to curate for other people when you don't want that.
Right.
And so it's to do unto others. And so that's where that comes from. So it's been a through line. It's not to exclude other groups of people, but I've just seen such a bedrock, particularly in the Black community, where they play this role. I wish they didn't have to play such a strong role, but they are so significant. And so we have to just have them in the back of our minds in terms of what we're doing with these various things and endeavors that we're funding.
You seem to be pretty unapologetic, and I think the foundation seems to be unapologetic about caring about race and justice. And it's not going to be lost on any of our listeners or anyone who's living in 2025 that within the sector of philanthropy, there are lots of folks who are trying to rethink, who do I fund? How do I fund? How do I articulate who I'm funding? Because I don't want to be targeted by perhaps the administration because I supported this community. And that's something that a lot of people are trying to think through. And then we listen to you, and we can certainly go to the foundation's website to see that they're not apologizing for anything. And so I wanted to see what your thoughts are right now, in this current moment we're in for the sector of philanthropy, about being unapologetic about wanting to support certain communities, like in the case where the single women in the past, or pardon me, single mothers in the past, that is something that you still entertain, to be specific about who you care about. And I guess another question would be, are you shifting as a result and saying, well, our current administration doesn't like what we're up to, so we're going to make a change? Or do you stay steadfast? I think I know the answer to this, but I wonder what you want to say about that.
Well, a couple of things I think is important. And one, I am a lawyer, so trained in that way. So once a lawyer, I'm not practicing right now, but once a lawyer, always a lawyer. Very first thing, when differences of opinion come out, you always have to focus on being in compliance with the law. Okay. And so it is about looking at the Civil Rights Act and fundamentally asking yourself, are you in compliance with that act? And we are. And so if you really read that language, we are not excluding people. We are not, but because you're not excluding people, it doesn't mean you can't include people. And so it's about the inclusion and focusing on people of need. We don't have quotas. That's not how we operate. And I'll tell you, I give this example to people all the time. And I used to run track when I was in school. And I said, think of it this way. You have 5 lanes. The other 4 lanes are people who look different than me. Okay. They happen to be, let's say, white brothers. And then you have me in my lane. And what's different is I have in this 20-meter run in this 100-meter run at the 20-meter mark, there is a giant boulder. How can I run that race? You are entitled to remove that boulder. Now, what you're not entitled to do, based on whatever your emotions are, is take that boulder and put it in the lane of other people, which is not what you're allowed to do. We don't do that. And so what we want to do is remove the boulder, and then it's my job as the runner to run the race. So everyone should be able to run the race without boulders in their lane. Full stop. Okay. The other part is to be in compliance, which is the IRS as a 501c3. We're not allowed, and never were, to engage in political activities. So follow the law. That was never okay. And I said that to certain people. They looked at me like, oh, we've been kind of doing that. And I go, well, be careful. You were never allowed to do that. That's not a new invention. And then lastly, it is to assert, which is constitutional right, of free speech. And so we can communicate what we care about. We can communicate our values. That cannot be extrapolated into illegal behaviors unless we are engaging in illegal behaviors. And so we're not. So it's just a careful understanding of that. It's actually more simple than people realize. And I think some of this might have been intentional to stir people up, but I think sometimes we spend more energy on some of those things than we should. The free expression is there. You're entitled to that. It's been supported time and time again by the courts. But what you have to do is be in compliance with the civil rights laws, and they are not newly written. they're there. And we should always stay in compliance with that. And we should remove barriers and put the work in and create opportunities that give people agency and not rob them of agency. So, no, we didn't change
Mhm.
our strategic plan. We passed a strategic plan a few years ago for racial, economic, and environmental justice.
Mhm.
And we believe that's important. Justice in those areas, and justice is not illegal.
For your colleagues who are running foundations right now, who are not attorneys, who are, again, feeling trepidation about who they might hire, who they might fund, yes, you laid out, is what you're doing illegal or is it legal? But still, people, sometimes fears can be irrational or justified. Regardless, the point is that people are making shifts. And so I wonder, for those who are not attorneys, just a small family foundation that's trying to stay off the radar, is there any guidance, not from a legal perspective, but as a fellow human in the sector of philanthropy that wants to do good, any guidance that you might give to them regarding doing the thing that is right, which is to say justice is not illegal. It is the right thing to do, and keep going instead of being afraid of what
Yeah,
might happen.
I think the through line is there's always an inner battle that goes on, right? That you have to wage internally. And so any leader needs to wage that battle internally, the things that are unseen to other people, and ask, what are you, is that a rational fear? Is that an irrational fear? But what we can't do as a leader is to allow that to get in the way of mission. But you're required as a leader to exercise judgment, common sense, prudence, also not flip it into your own ego, because sometimes people want to express and emote and do different things and act out. You don't get to do that when you're running an organization. You have to modulate all of that, guide the ship, because you know what's most important? The outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can't be lost is it's the pursuit of solutions. It's the pursuit of outcomes. It's not always about, I want everybody to see me planting the flag. I
Mm-hmm.
want to do this and that. Because again, you hear the word I and me, and you have to check yourself. And that's what leaders should always do. You have to check yourself because it's very easy to get lost in the aggrandizement that can go with that, and the temptation that goes with that, and the spiritual warfare that goes with that. You have to stay on the course for pursuing solutions and doing things the right way for the right reasons. And that would be my advice. And sometimes you're going to be in uncomfortable places, but that's okay. It's not about your individual comfort.
At the end of last year, with the election, I recall being a part of communities that were in despair and worried about what was going to happen in 2025. And maybe naively, my thought was, it'll be fine. But not so naively, I often said, what if you're created for this moment? What if
Mm-hmm.
what's ever going to happen in 2025, maybe the fact that you are alive right now and not in 100 years in the future or 100 years in the past, but maybe your existence in 2025 is actually on time, and that you get to be someone who gets to respond to this moment. Again, I'll always say for myself, I think part of my call on this planet, as a writer, as a storyteller, as a photographer, all those things, is ultimately to help transform how the world thinks about slavery through film. That's my superpower, and that's the work that I do. But I wonder for you, as someone who is admittedly a person of faith, do you have any thoughts about why you are here in this moment in 2025 as the leader of this foundation and not 100 years in the future or 100 years in the past?
What I would say is perspective matters. When we think about our grandparents, people in front of us, think of what they had to go through. And I'm not being naive that we don't have challenges, but my goodness, we have to put it in perspective. One of the things my mother said, which I never forgot, God rest her soul, we integrated a neighborhood in New Jersey. So we moved from Philadelphia to New Jersey in the 60s to integrate a neighborhood, and they didn't want us there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had police cars that had to be parked in front of our house, stuff that you read about. I lived it,
Hmm.
seldom talk about it. And she gave us a talk when we were going off to the grade school, and they wanted us to have this private school education. So it was a private school. There were 3 Blacks in the school, my brother, my sister, and me. And my mother said, there are a couple things I want you to know. And she said, one of the things was, however bad it's going to be, and this was the first time she started using the N word. And she said, these are the things people are going to call you. This is what's going to happen. So as a 6-year-old, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to face all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the
Hmm.
second part, and the third part was, she said, the second thing you need to know is I went to private school and had to pay my own way, and I had it worse. And then she said, and the third part, which I really have never forgotten, is that will not be an excuse for the grades you get in math, science, and reading. Go
Hmm.
to school. Go to school. And then later on, she said, I don't want you to initiate a fight. And this is where the Philly, because she was a Philly woman, you're not allowed to initiate the fight. But then with that gleam in her eye, she said, finish it.
Mm-hmm.
So the motto of the story is we, at different eras, are tested by our times. We are not unique, being tested by times. And so you have to not, again, go into this idiosyncratic or sort of always looking at self and going, woe is me, oh my goodness, because many others were tested by times,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's what we're called upon. But what do we do with it, right? And one of the things, again, a false dichotomy that's created is someone asked me, how are you responding to these times? First thing I said is, I'm not a person who spends my time in response mode. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I jokingly said, I like the letter R. And she looks at me like, what does that mean? And I go, well, I'm going to tell you some of what's going on. You have one group of people that just wants to reduce in an unthoughtful way, meaning financially. You have another group of people that just wants to restore money. I said, I'm actually in the third group that gets very little room, and that is to reform. And so, despite all of the problems, are we actually saying that the way things have been somehow worked? When you look at the educational attainment, when you look at the poverty rates, when you look at some of these other things, really?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I say is, and I said it, I'm not going to be trotted out there in a reflex mode to agree with the reductions, to agree with just blindly restoring without putting in thought and without saying we need to do some things better, because we still have too many kids who graduate, particularly kids of color, can't read, no math skills, and we're moving rapidly into a new industrial era fueled by AI
Mm-hmm.
and other technologies, and they're going to be ill-equipped. So then we're all going to be sitting here saying, can you spend more money?
Mm-hmm.
But where did the investments go?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's about holding everybody accountable for bringing a return, keeping our values, having a purpose, but the purpose is about solutions. It's not about how I feel.
Now that we're in the last quarter of 2025 and we're going into the first quarter of next year, what
Mhm.
is what are your major goals for what reformation will look like, as far as what you can do and what the foundation might be able to
Yeah,
do?
I think it starts with critical thinking, um, that goes with asking tough questions. I'm a big believer in the Socratic method. So we should question everything and say to ourselves, why do we have to assume that it must be this way?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have to allow decay to be the norm? Why does it have to be that health disparities are the norm?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're willing to question, you question everything. You question everything to say what works and what doesn't. And we don't fall into this trap of just robotically agreeing with one point of view versus another, because what matters is the purpose of getting it right. And so I use the term radical pragmatism. And so we've got to be radical in the sense of boldness, but we also have to be pragmatic in terms of solutions. By definition, aren't solutions supposed to be pragmatic? They shouldn't be dogmatic.
Mm-hmm.
Your values can be sacrosanct, and your values, I often use the expression, are not seasonably adjusted. but
Right.
but getting toward a solution ought to be pragmatic. So we're not pragmatic enough on some of these things, and so we're not willing to say sometimes, we've been doing this a particular way for the past 25 years. Is it working?
Mm-hmm.
Let's actually look at data. If it's not working, a radical pragmatist would say, I want to lean in and do something about it. Doesn't mean you're not going to spend anymore. It means, how are you spending? It's like the example I was given. Here's an example. And people often will pick on California with this, but it's high costs everywhere. So for affordable housing in a state like California to build, and in many other states, it's a big number, but I'm giving you like one of the worst examples, to build a 2-bedroom apartment for that mom to live in with her family
Mm-hmm.
will cost between $700 and $900,000 per unit.
Mm-hmm.
Now think about that from a social policy. If you gave her a choice and said it doesn't have to be the whole 700, suppose you said we're going to give you $450,000 and give you the chance to go out and buy a
Mm-hmm.
small home to change the trajectory of your family and create worth. From a social policy standpoint, might that be smarter
Right.
to get people out of the revolving door?
Right.
It's I'm not saying that that's the only way, but are we looking at different examples like that? Or why does somebody have to run around if they're eligible for these programs with the technology that we have? Can't we just make it so that you authenticate the person, have universal eligibility, and you receive the resources that you're entitled to receive? But instead, we have to have all the outreach people, all of the different people focused on adoption, all of this different apparatus, when we should simply be focused on getting a person what they are owed and what the law says they're eligible for. Very few of those examples exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I mean by the kind of pragmatism and boldness. So I'm looking for innovation. So in Nathan Cummings, one of the things we did, and if you're familiar with different investment approaches, very often startups rely on friends and family money.
Yes, we
And
know it.
I don't know about, and you know this as an
Yep.
entrepreneur. Well, I don't know if you have a lot of people around you that can write friends and family checks. So it's really difficult. So
Mm-hmm.
what I said was, and again, this sometimes an elite exercise of who gets access to people. How many people, like you were saying, like they don't know that I'm here or whatever. So what I wanted to do was arm some of our program team with a new resource to go out and find people who have new ideas. And so we call it venture grants, just like a venture capital should be. So we have venture grants. And now more and more people are finding out about it, but it enables my team members to be able to put a grant into someone's hands with a startup concept and idea that could go anywhere from 25,000 up to 100,000 to get them started, to be that friends and family, to help them start their venture. And we made the application really short because
Mm.
that's the other thing, to not put you through that. But that just came from my own experience working in the field and saying what it was like for me. And I said, boy, that would have been great,
Mm-hmm.
to take my ideas and get that kind of venture cap. So we've just started this. We've been doing it for a couple of years. And so over time, I'm looking forward to looking backward and asking how is that working, and have we help to create some unicorns with that money and some breakthrough ideas. And we also allow an established organization that has a different kind of idea, a radical idea, and something that they wouldn't ordinarily get funded, then we can enable them to be eligible. But we're really looking for the people that I call change makers, who are generationally different than some of the established organizations that might have been there for 40 years, and say, can't there be a lane for some of these other innovators,
Mm-hmm.
and then allow the best ideas to move up and reduce some of the gatekeeping that goes on? There's an awful lot of gatekeeping.
You know what? And I know it as a fundraiser and as a funder,
Mm-hmm.
it's wild out there. Is there a particular partner, not grantee, is there a particular partner in your experience, Ray, that you can think of that you're particularly proud of, or yeah, that you're particularly proud of regarding how the foundation was able to make a way to create some sort of impact for that partner?
There's a long list, and I'm smiling because it's a long list.
Good.
But I'll tell you one group that really is astonishing in their success. One of the things that I found out early on with our foundation, but in many foundations, it is about a world of gatekeeping, right? And so the biggest asset that a foundation has is its endowment. And so we're by law, we have to spend 5% each year. But the endowment very often gets to invest in a whole bunch of different things. Sometimes they're not good for the environment. Sometimes they're not promoting racial justice. But the rationale had always been, we're just going to do good things and then we'll give you money and, we'll make money and then you go off and do good things. And so one, we said, we want to make sure that all of our investments are impact. And so every investment ought to do no harm to the environment, issues around economic, racial, environmental justice, but also can be in pursuit of solutions. That was number one. But then number two was, we have an outside manager of our money. And we wanted to make sure that we had alignment with our values. And we selected an organization, which is a compilation of two organizations that came together. And this is a unicorn because they look like you and I. Vivian and Wes Fuller came together for an open RFP. We had people compete from all over the world to manage our money, and they won it. Now, the journey was, and again, we did this appropriately and legally. I didn't know them before the competition. But here's what I knew, and data matters. Data tells you a few things. One, the managers of money, people who look like you and I, and also gender, if you added them all up, it's roughly less than 2%. Period. Full stop. All the trillions of dollars. So that's nuts. But then if you look behind it, when these competitions opened, let's forget for a moment about dynamics of racism and sexism, which are just through lines of society. So I can't reinvent that. But two things happen. The cutoff of the assets under management, which is known as the AUM, how many assets are you managing? Very often the cutoff point is so high at billions of dollars, it cuts out all of the small players. But here's the second one that often happens. When there's an RFP, people make it hard for newly formed ventures to pursue. So you might have a part, Michelle, and you might say, well, let me team up with my colleagues here and let's go for it. Very often you're not able to do that. So when we went through the process, I said to our evaluation team, I'm going to let you move forward and cull through all these applications, but you have to come back to me on what I call strategic issues. And I knew that these would be two strategic issues. So the first was minimum, assets under management. And this group happened to have only had a little over $1 billion, so you would never get in. But again, I didn't know the group. And I just said, no, I want to see further. So I don't want the minimum to be 5 billion or 3 billion. And then they said, well, it's going to cost more in review. And this is where power comes in. And I said, I have the budget. I want to see more. So that see more meant more women, more people of color, just intuiting that we would get to see that. Again, I did not know any of the women groups or the people of color groups prior. Then the second thing came up with newly formed. I answered it the same way, no. And I used the term, I want expanded sightlines. I want to see who's available. And so they made it, and they made it to the finals, and they won. And in the 3.5 years they've been with us, not only have they performed financially, they have also performed by converting our investment portfolio into high impact. Number three, oh, by the way, not by quota, more of the managers they selected to put money into were more women owned and people of color owned, not as a mandate, but as a matter of the same principle of expanding their sightlines, seeing who's standing next to you, seeing who's over the horizon, which isn't there. So Vivian West Fuller now has billions of dollars under assets. And I knew when we made that call that it would signal the market. And what it was, Michelle, was a way of saying yes to someone else's dream. Because then they could say yes to other people.
That's right.
And so what I often say to people in this space is you've got to do the thing. You've got to, and one of the things I'll say is you got to get started to get started.
Yes.
And so you've got to go and do it. And so it's not a white paper being written. And I got tired of hearing about the 2% problem and all of that. And I'm like, got to do something. And that's what we did. So I'm really proud of that. And there are others. There's a manager that they invested in called V Square. This is a gentleman who it's a firm run by two Black men, both of one grew up in Europe, and he's of African descent. Had no foundations invest in them when he came to Bibby and West Fuller and ultimately to us. We said yes,
Hmm.
and now they're at 1.2 billion of assets under management in just a few years.
Awesome.
Mamadou Sarr. So there are a list of people like that. Just by that, the power of saying yes and understanding intent, and then having expectations.
Well, it's almost like what you said at the beginning, right? You want to stitch together your yeses, because if you can stitch those
Yes.
together, it gets you to the next and to the next
Yep.
and to the next. And then it sounds like what's so awesome about part of the work that you do is that, as a fundraiser, for which you have the experience, is that when you're asking for funds, either as for profit or nonprofit, someone's always asking you, like, but who else is involved? Who else is giving
Mm-hmm.
to that thing? It's like, well, you need
Mm-hmm.
always that person to, like, tell people the water is fine, right? That the dance floor, you can actually, the music's working and it's actually going to be fun. And
I
so,
love how you say that. We did a landscape analysis, as it's called,
yeah,
to look at who could do impact related work. And before we did a request for proposals, and when it came out, my summary to our investment committee was the water is
the
fine,
water's
you can
fine.
get in.
You can get
And
in.
so
That's
that's so you
awesome.
used the perfect analogy. The water is fine, you can get in. And that's a big part of this because and Mamadou in particular with V Square, he was also a track runner. And he said, I knew I could win any race if you just got the stuff out of my way. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
win. So he's
Mm-hmm.
not looking for any of this. He doesn't need anybody to curate his life. He's just
Mm-hmm.
like, get the barriers out. Let me in the game. Let
Right.
me get in the room.
Well, that's what so many of us are just asking for, is a chance, a chance,
Mm-hmm.
a chance. As Black people in the sector of philanthropy, an opportunity to apply, an opportunity to run, an opportunity to actually be the funder.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want your legacy to be, Ray, in the midst of all of this? When you think 10 years from now, 5 years from now, or whatever you're like, however long you're in this space, you said being a CEO is not forever. What do you want your legacy to be at the end of your
Just
time?
just a couple things that I always describe as the foundation. So it's my legacy and it's theirs. Driven by data, aspirational, and restless. And so
Restless.
it's restless. So it's all three of those things. You can never just sit down. And it's like I often say, like especially living in a city like DC, people hold a lot of banquets here so they can give themselves pats on the back and plaques.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in all of that. It is at the end of the day, your legacy is reflected by your investments. And that means who did you invest in? And are you using all of your political capital to take the risk, but also your own comfort? You have to put yourself sometimes in uncomfortable situations, take those risks, and give the yes to other people. It's a privilege being able to do this and being able to see the looks on people's face or just call them and say, guess what?
That's
And I
awesome.
have these tiny little grants that I can do, which are discretionary without going through the whole normal process. And every now and then it'll just come from engaging with some people. And one person in particular, I called him up after he engaged me in a couple conversations. And I said, I need to get some basic information, about you. And at the end, he goes, why? I said, I just wanted to send you a $25,000 check.
Hmm.
And he was like, oh my goodness,
Mm-hmm.
like that's it.
Yeah.
And it was actually more joy for me
Yeah.
than it was for him to be able to do that because I knew what it was like when I started an operation from the basement. I had one economy and I started it from the basement and it was just four of us.
Mm-hmm.
And every single dollar mattered. And
Mm-hmm.
when the mail came, we were checking it all the time. And one time I had this uh, envelope come addressed to me and I go, I wonder what this is. It was from a particular bank and I knew some people who worked there. And literally I just popped it open and out drops a check for
Hmm.
$25,000.
Yeah.
And it just said, I thought you could use it.
And you could.
Yeah. And it made me cry. And I cried.
Awesome. Awesome. Where does this restlessness come from for you?
I think for me, I know I can tie it back to some of the things that happened early on that some of us experience,
Hmm.
and it's lowered expectations. that people placed on me when I was in the school. And
Mm.
so they all, which is what I see happening too often with Black kids and others in school. And a lot of people are in on it and they don't realize how damaging it is. The expectation is lowered. And so people are like, oh, you can't do it. You can't do it. You won't be able to do it. So settle on this. And when Mrs. Pfeiffer was the first person who actually, outside of my family, said, you're smart. And I don't understand why you're where you are. And to me, you're the smartest boy in the class, if not the whole school. That's what she said to me. And it just refueled my agency. There was always an incongruency between my dreams and how external people viewed me. And I pretended on the outside to be indifferent, but on the inside, it was tearing me apart.
Yep.
And so I had this ability to start expressing and then looking at the world in a different way. And I'm like, I'm going to go for it. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to waste time. And so you have to be restless in order to do that. Switch positions, go into a different realm, try some different things, take those risks because the clock is ticking.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then at the end, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you don't get any more shots. So I love being restless, and I in different organizations I have a technique that I call enlightened disruption. And so sometimes you've got to disrupt a little bit, not because you're a nihilist, but because you're restless because you want to get closer to solutions. There is no such thing as perfection, so it should be perpetual movement. And I always say to people, it's not perfection, it's progress.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's you want to keep looking at yourself and your organization and also the country and say, are we progressing? And so it's a level of movement, not the self-satisfaction or the self-congratulation.
What's your dream, Ray, for philanthropy?
That it gets closer to the pursuit of solutions, and that means it is willing to interrogate itself and not rest on terms which are misapplied, which are, oh, this is the best practice, or this is settled science, or different ridiculous terms like that. It is to be restless itself and willing to look at data and not be bogged down by orthodoxy, which I think is one of the big dangers. And there's orthodoxy. And so you have to be willing to break it because you exist because there are certain things that aren't working well in society.
Mm-hmm.
So then you've got to go about it with that sense of experimentation and open-mindedness, and not allow the different corners of a foundation to take it over. Because the tendency, look, we're human beings. So we can become tribal. We can become, I like them, or I don't like this one, or they look this way, or they look that way. And I said to one person, I said, you are entitled to your ideology, but your ideology is not a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about who you're fighting for, it is to pursue those solutions, not to just feel good yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I meant early on about the
It's a great definition. I always said that Black philanthropy for me is uh, the participation of Black people in the space of assets being exchanged in the absence of goods and services. But I like
Mhm.
yours much better.
You
uh,
can use it. You can go and use it.
Ray, we talked a little bit about the foundation and the partners that it supports. Can you share a little bit about the endowment, the size of the endowment, and how much the foundation actually allocates each year to partners?
The size of the Nathan Cummings endowment is close to $500 million.
Hmm,
And
okay.
so, and we, by law, put out 5% of that every year. And when it comes out by way of grants, but we also have done a special carve out for lending and mission investing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a $22 million carve out for that program as well.
And so, for some people, we all understand grants, but mission investing is a new concept for some folks. Can you explain what mission investing is?
Yeah, it's got several definitions, but the way to think about it is it's concessionary versus impact. So our impact for our endowment is not about concessionary. It is to pursue impacts with our investments. So we're still looking at good risk adjusted returns. But in the mission space, for example, if we make a loan, that loan could be zero interest up to 2% interest. And so we're willing to use it in a very catalytic way. And so this gives us an approach to what we call the totality of assets approach. So we look at what we do by looking at a number of our assets, from loans to grants to mission investing to impact investing to even our communications work. And we say all of these are assets, and we want to use the totality of these assets to drive impact.
Hmm.
So that's all part of our strategic plan.
Do you receive any return for a mission investment if you invest in a opportunity? Can you receive anything back from that?
Yeah, so if we're making an investment, at a minimum, the goal is to get the capital returned.
Got it.
If we earn something off of it, that's great, but you're actually not permitted from a matter of law to make it about the pursuit
Hmm.
of return. It has to be the pursuit of driving social outcomes.
And so you are a Black man who is over $500 million worth of um, funds that can be invested in different capacities through impact in
Mhm.
particular. And for some of our guests, we've talked a little bit about, let's say, Jason Terrell, Darren Goss. We all talk about what it's like for them as Black men to be running these institutions. And there's varying experiences. And so I wondered for you, as a Black man who's over these investments, can you talk a little bit about how being a Black man in this space matters, if it matters at all? Is it something that you think about, or is it something that just happens to be and you keep on doing the work that you're doing without thought of?
In our life journey, we're going to wear multiple hats.
Hmm.
For me, I just view it as one of the hats that I've worn, but the dynamics and the dimensions of society are still there, right? And so I can still be followed in the grocery store or the CVS, or you can sense something when someone's looking at you a particular way. And my approach to all that is, you know what? If I'm in a negotiation with you, the color that matters is green.
Hmm.
So I was raised not to spend my time on a journey worrying and guessing what someone is thinking about me. And there's a lot of that that goes on, and I think it's anxiety producing.
Hmm.
Your sense of self-worth comes from your inside, because I have no control over what is happening external. The only things I get to control are driving outcomes for the foundation, and then I'm legally and happily required to make sure that our environment meets the tenets of the law, civil rights, people's identities. Different things are nurtured, and we have well more than a sufficient environment to make it a conducive environment. But the third leg, which is the inner journey of another person
Hmm.
and how they're processing me and looking at my Blackness, I don't get to control that. I get to control me, and I get a say in how the assets go. And
Hmm.
that's where I put my focus. But it's not, again, the false choice that, oh, I'm pretending that those things aren't happening, because sometimes people say, oh, you're not paying attention. Of course I'm paying attention to it. I'm a sentient being. I know what's going on around me, but
Hmm.
it's a question of, does it control me,
Hmm.
or am I going to be in control?
Hmm. Hmm.
I would rather be in control.
I 100% know that you'd rather be in control. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It's not a good use of your time or anyone's time, really.
Right.
So another question that I have for you today, Ray, relates to failure. And so, this is always my favorite question because I think I'm a person that believes in celebrating our failures, that
Mhm.
there can be information to be gained in those failures, that if we're paying attention, that can then instruct us in the way to go. And I often
Mhm.
find in Black spaces, talking about Black excellence, Black brilliance is awesome. But I also think that that can be a cover for Black perfectionism, which can be a killer. It can be really
Mhm.
hurtful. It doesn't allow us to be human.
Mhm.
And so I wondered, in all of your brilliance, in all of your excellence, in all of your Blackness, is there a failure or a mistake that you've made throughout your career, either in the sector of philanthropy or prior to that, that has
Mhm.
been particularly informative for you on how you move forward in the future?
First of all, the list is long, so I'm only going to
We have
try
a few
to.
minutes left.
Yeah, yeah. So the list is long, but there are different things that come to mind. I think there have been times where I've given misplaced faith in certain individuals, and you pour yourself into it, and then over time the real them is revealed. And what I would say is, it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to take that hurt. There have been some projects that I threw myself into that didn't turn out the way I would have liked them to turn out for a variety of reasons. You're placing bets, and sometimes those bets go awry. And I have my share of those. Sometimes you will drive yourself too hard, and I think what you're saying, it's a mistake, and I had to learn this, that the pursuit is not perfection.
Mm-hmm.
It is progress. And like many, I would try to walk with an element of perfection, which is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to reach this point of understanding that there was one person who walked the world who was actually perfect, and they put him on a cross. So and I'm not that guy,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so there are many, but I reflect on them. I don't let them take over my brain, but they're never far out of reach for what did I learn from that. And you just get wiser,
Mm-hmm.
and you bring better discernment, and then you have a recall to say, wait a minute, let me ask the extra question, or what is the unintended consequence of this? When people are like marshaling their forces to stop you. I mean, I had to learn that if you are trying to go after something for the right intent, sometimes that's going to attract enemies. And you better learn how to recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had situations where I would recognize it late in the game. Now, it didn't take me out, but it caused extra pain,
Mm-hmm.
extra grief,
Mm-hmm.
extra time. And, if you could do a do over, which we don't get to have in life, I'd be like, boy, I would know about that. Or
Mm-hmm.
I would know to look at that behavior and read something about it. So we just have to look at ourselves as a work in progress.
One thing I didn't ask you, Ray, is what's your mom's name? You spoke so highly of her and how
Yeah,
meaningful she was.
Janice.
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 Awesome.
Janice Ramsey, Philadelphia woman. My father is Felix.
Father Felix, mom Janice.
Janice. Yeah.
Awesome. So there is some hopelessness across the country about what's happening. We are currently in a government shutdown. Isn't that interesting? And so people have real reasons to feel hopeless or to feel anxious and to be afraid. And I wondered for you, Ray, how are you feeling? One, right now. And number two, do you feel hopeless? And if you don't, where is your hope coming from?
Well, I absolutely don't feel hopeless.
Awesome.
It just comes very quickly because, again, there are things that are of a higher order that are ultimately going to win, and you've got to play for the long game. And there are also merchants of hopelessness on all sides in persuasion that benefit from it. We're bombarded with algorithms and other things. People monetize rage,
Mm-hmm.
and those sorts of things. So you have to learn how to like discern that some of those things are not real. The online world is not a total reflection of what the real world is. There's a lot of distorted information. The power of the human spirit and the ability of people to exercise judgment, be resilient. Some people would think, that we were like back to what you were saying with the slave ships, and we're not. Even though that there are difficulties, and we're just not. That's not what our ancestors would look at that, and they say, if I knew that,
Mm-hmm.
Michelle would be where she is,
Mm-hmm.
or Ray would be, they'd be like, I'll trade for that any day.
Hmm.
You're producing success. I hope I am as well. There are many others. And again, you would stand the test of time, but we cannot slump our shoulders and allow our dreams to be
Mm-hmm.
defeated. There's a book that really influenced me called The Choice by Edith Edgar.
Hmm.
And she is a woman who survived Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
And what's powerful about it is the book, again, is called The Choice. And she was very clear. Those Nazi individuals victimized her and the other prisoners every single day. They were victimized. But what kept her going was her mental state, which was they would never take over my mind
Mm-hmm.
and make me a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And that always stayed with me. And look at what she had to go through. So she witnessed death, starvation, gang rapes, other things all around her, and she got out of there and said, I'm not a victim. And then after she got out of there, spent her life helping other people deal with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So we need more Edith Edgars, like that. And we get to decide if we're a victim, but it's not pretending that you're not being victimized,
Right.
but they're not the same thing.
Ray, so we talked a bit about your journey into philanthropy. You run this amazing foundation. You've got courage. You're not. You have choice. You give hope. You have hope, and then you've got a book. Can you share a little bit about this book?
I'm excited about it, and you can see I'm smiling. It's
Yep.
called Tyranny of False Choices.
Okay.
And a lot of what we've been talking about, Michelle, it really is encapsulated with that we, and just I'll get the basics out. It actually is due to come out March 17th of 2026.
Awesome.
I've actually finished writing it.
Congratulations.
So thank you. And it was just a joyous labor of love. And it really deals with a universal experience. It's not an autobiography, although I put some stories in there of my own lived experience. It is about a dimension that affects us all.
Okay.
First of all, we all have to make decisions. Our decisions have consequences, and our lives are complicated in the decision making by the first thing is the external. We are surrounded by noise, by things like algorithms, tribalism, partisanship, rigid organizational hierarchies, all of these things that are designed to control and distort your decision making. Some of that control is benign. Other times it's malignant. Sometimes it's intentional. Other times it's not. So we have to navigate that terrain of all of that noise. But if that weren't enough, we have what I call internal whispers that we're dealing with. Some of the things we were talking about today: self-doubt, jealousy, when our energy drops low, conceit, all these different things. So this is what we have to navigate in life, and then make decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and then deal with those consequences. But the good news is that there is a path forward for every single person in the world. And that is, we have an inner core. I don't care what you call it, right? Some people call it an inner voice,
Mm-hmm.
a moral compass. You have something, and there have been tests and studies to show that even if you weren't taught all of these things, fundamentally, you know right from wrong. C.S. Lewis talks about this in Mere Christianity, where there are just basics of morality that come to mind when different situations happen. But you know what we do, all of us at different points, we try to distort our own compass.
Mm-hmm.
And and there's a difference in life between desire and purpose. And purpose will ultimately make you happy, but we are told to always pursue desire. And so every one of us has in us virtues that will help us get closer to our moral compass. And then we have time tested tools, right, that we should use to make better decisions: discourse,
Mm-hmm.
debate,
Mm-hmm.
dialogue, critical thinking, asking the extra question. But think about what's going on. People are like telling all of us in their different camps, no, think in a more narrow way.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to talk to them. You don't even need to have a debate. You don't need dialogue. Don't rely on your moral compass. We will tell you what is right and wrong. We will tell you the act. We have to all question that, because there are motives,
Mm-hmm.
and people profit. These merchants of this bad discourse and of the negativity. We have to reject the false choices. And so I call it people trying to put you in a thought prison. And the antidote to all of that is to liberate thought.
Mm-hmm.
How do you liberate your thoughts? And remember, we were talking about earlier the pursuit of solutions. You have to liberate thoughts in order to get there.
Right.
Who benefits from the status quo?
Right.
There are many people that benefit from things staying exactly. So their words are saying one thing, but their deeds are saying another. But if we never question it, they get away with it. It's an outrage that our kids are graduating from schools and they don't have the basics.
Right.
It's an outrage that we can't figure out how to make sure housing that's decent, safe, clean, and affordable is available to people across the country. There are these things. And you have to work hard to spend trillions of dollars annually and not solve all of these things. So you have to say, like, what's going on with that? And then if you add
Right.
all the money from philanthropy. So that's what the book is about. And I talk about it from the dimension of self, from the dimension of your own organization,
Mm-hmm.
and what does it portend for our country?
Mm-hmm.
That it's a tyranny of false choices.
Ray, when did you first decide that you wanted to write this book?
It's been rumbling around in me
Yeah.
for a while,
Yeah.
but when COVID happened,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually when I named it.
Awesome.
Because my personal experience was, I made my own personal decision about what I wanted to do with shots and boosters and those sorts of things. But then I just saw people being ripped apart from each other, and you had to be either or. And so if you didn't get the shot, you were called one thing. If you got the shot, you were called another. People were being deplatformed,
Mm-hmm.
not supposed to. It's crazy behavior
Mm-hmm.
of people sort of at each other based on what choices you get to make. And it hit me when I wanted to go to a local hardware store, and it was closed, during COVID. And I went, darn it, I can't get this particular item. And then someone came up to me who saw that I was looking and said, oh, you can go to the Home Depot. And so I went to the Home Depot and I went, wait a minute, it's packed with people. So if you close the small mom and pop for health reasons, why is the big store, the big box store open?
Hmm.
And I just asked that question. Why is it open? Filled with people.
Mm-hmm.
So choices were being made, and I felt like I should be able to make a choice, because it would have been fewer people in the mom and pop, but yet it was actually less safe in the big. Could that be tied to contributions, power in society, all of those sorts of things? So the word tyranny came to mind, but I've always used the word tyranny because going all the way back in the beginnings of my career and early in my life, I called it the tyranny of lowered expectations.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's forces that are trying to keep you down, trying to keep you in a box. And I'm in favor of liberation of thought and your ideas for your pursuit of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be articulated and designed by other people or curated for you. But you find that people actually don't want you thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Why? Why? So you've had this desire for a bit of time. There was a catalyst for you to create the title. Everybody's got a book. Like, I should write a book. Everyone's got a book, and they always say everyone's got at least one book in them. Maybe two is probably being generous. Why actually take all the steps? As busy as you are, why take the steps to actually go through the process of writing a book, getting a publisher? Why was
Well,
it important to you?
and part of it is I felt like I've just lived this in every organization I've been in. The notion of bringing this pragmatism, the disruption that's required, the restlessness that I told you. And I just said, it's time. And then there was this mutual coming together with my publisher, Forbes, and we found each other and just started talking about it. And they just turned the camera on at one point and let me talk.
Mm-hmm.
About the concept. And they're like, wow, there's a story here, and it holds together. And I'm living and breathing it inside of Nathan Cummings. I lived it and breathed it when I was chairing Habitat for Humanity and the different things that I've been at. So I bring in examples in life of some famous people. So, talking about King, who people forget that he was going against the grain and people actually attacked him from all sides. Oh, you're an accommodationist, or oh, you're a radical. And Darwin went through this, and people like ostracize him. Galileo actually brought science into the mix, and people were like, you're a heretic, you're wrong. And so you think, so sometimes when you're living in this world, taking that stand, you're the one who's ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
But you were actually, over the long form of history, proven right.
Right.
And then I highlight some people that I call boundary crossers, because the methodology that's needed, that people like you and others are called upon, is to cross boundaries. And so that's ideological boundaries. It's you're going to show up in spaces and places where people may not look like you, but you're bringing your values and purpose into the room. And so I celebrate the boundary crossers, and I say they're giving us an example for how to do it. And so it's designed to kind of walk you through some of the history, some real experiences that I've had where I've had to navigate false choices. And sometimes it was really hard, losing a really good friend, having to fire somebody that was like meant everything to me, but the core values were challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I had to clear through the clutter and the whispers in my brain to make a decision. Because remember, we all get to make decisions. And I'll leave you with this one thought that I said at the beginning of the book, and something that I shared in a graduation years ago. One of the most incredible honors that I ever had, and I'll never get getting a phone call, and my assistant said, "It's your alma mater, Rutgers, calling, and they
Awesome.
want you to be graduation speaker." And I was like, "Oh, you mean for one of the sections or groups?" She said, "No, for the whole thing." I said, "This is impossible. Of course I'm going to do it." So here's what I said to the students. Every single person is an artist. So imagine everybody born into this world is an artist.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing to keep in mind is you get only one canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And what's on that canvas is how you handle the defining moments of your life,
Mm-hmm.
the choices you make. And in the end, you get to choose whether your canvas will be tepid shades of gray or broad strokes with bright colors.
Mm-hmm.
The choice is yours.
It's such a privilege. It's a privilege to be alive, Ray. You know, some people know that my father, he passed in on May. This show is also dedicated to my dad. Passed away on May 20th. His name is Solomon Neil
Sorry.
Jackson. He's so awesome. But I
Sorry.
remember thank you, when he passed, there was just this reminder of you do get one shot. Again, I'd studied religion at UCLA. Depends on who you talk to. You might get a couple chances, but as far as I'm aware, we get one chance currently.
Right.
And if you do get one chance, and I find, to your point, there's so many people who are right now, because times are so chaotic, particularly in the U.S., that policies or leadership people are allowing the policies and the leadership to determine how they're showing up in the world. And I think when I get to meet our ancestors, when I can see my dad again, or I can see Grandpa Solomon again, am I going to say, but you know what? They canceled out, or I was told that this policy was no longer allowed, so I didn't show up the way that I was called to show up. I just don't think that I'm going to be able to look them in the face and say, I didn't show up the way that I was called to because I was afraid of what this current administration or the current policies, or the current economy, or the people down the street, and I live in a very rural area. We get one shot. And so, yes, thank you for the reminder that we are artists and that we get one canvas, and that so many of us come from so many awesome, amazing people, regardless of race. You come from amazing people who got you here. And so the question that I'm always asking myself every day this morning, how am I going to show up to honor that legacy? So thank you for reminding us about the legacy that you want to have in this sector, but also as a Ramsey. It's really awesome. Before I forget to ask you, Ray, how can people stay in contact with you?
Reaching me at ray.ramsey@nathancummings.com is the best way, or finding me, Ray with an E, on LinkedIn, and I do eventually get back to everybody. And before we cast off, I'm just grateful for you, so I want to express the gratitude toward you and your journey, which is inspiring to me.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love everything about you, and I think it's fair to say that we love everything about you, that you're, as we were talking during a break, of course, we both did track. There is an energy about you that is like, you just can't wait to get out of those, what are they called? Not the gates, but those things that we put our feet
The
on.
blockers.
The blocks. Can't wait to get out of the
Yeah.
block that you just always look like, let me loose. I can imagine that you were formidable when you were a fundraiser.
Well, that's why they always put me as the lead runner in the relay, because I would be in the blocks to get off to a great start.
That's right.
So I
That's right.
burst out of the blocks. Man, I still love that, and I ran in the Penn relays, so it's a cool thing.
Awesome. Well, you're awesome. Thank you for trusting us to help tell your story. Thank you to our listeners. Of course, we want to thank you. Both Ray and I want to thank you for trusting us with your time today. We want to honor you as well. You know how to get a hold of me. You now know how to get a hold of Ray. You are not alone in this work. You are valued in this work, and you matter in this work.